When my mother-in-law told me I wasn't welcome at the family dinner, I didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't even flinch. I just laughed, out loud, in front of everyone. And then I did the one thing she never saw coming. I walked past her, looked the waiter in the eye and asked, "Could you please tell the owner I'd like a seat?" She froze. My husband blinked, even the waiter tilted his head, and I smiled. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know who the owner was. And in that moment, I realised something simple and powerful. I didn't need their invitation to sit at a table I helped build, but to understand how I got there, you'd have to go way back, to a girl who used to shrink herself to fit into other people's spaces. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't need much, or at least, that's what everyone said. She's so low maintenance, my mum used to tell people, as if that was a compliment. But I wasn't easy. I was just invisible, and I learned to survive in the spaces where no one was looking. Family dinners back then were efficient. Plates passed, voices flat, love measured in silence and clean dishes. I remember once I brought home a drawing I was proud of, a house with a sun, a big tree, and 3 people holding hands. I placed it on the fridge. Next morning, it was gone, replaced by a coupon for detergent. That's the thing about growing up in a house where feelings were folded and stored like napkins. You start to forget what hunger feels like. Not for food, but for warmth, for being seen. So I didn't ask for much, not on birthdays, not on report card days, not even when I won that writing contest in 6th grade. They nodded, said, "Good job," then turned back to whatever felt more urgent than me. I carried that girl with me for years, the girl who learned not to need, not to ask, not to expect. And when I met his family, my future husbands, with their fancy place settings, their shiny dinners and sharp smiles, I thought I'd finally found a table where maybe I could belong. I didn't realise yet I was just stepping into another kind of silence, a prettier one, but colder. The first cracks didn't come from shouting. They came from the smallest things. A glance, a laugh, a seat that was never quite mine. It started with little things, like the way she'd serve everyone at the table and skip me until last, even if I was right next to her. Or the way she said, "You can bring store-bought next time," after I spent 5 hours making her mother's recipe from scratch. They weren't knives. They were needles, little stings under the skin that no one else seemed to notice. And when I looked at my husband for help, he'd just smile politely and say, "She didn't mean it like that." But she did, and I knew it. At first I tried harder, baked more, dressed nicer, learned the names of every cousin and co-worker. I wanted to be part of the family, to be one of them, but I wasn't, not really. I remember one Thanksgiving when everyone went around the table saying what they were thankful for. When it came to me, she smiled and said, "We're thankful he found someone so resilient." Everyone laughed, and I laughed too. But inside, I felt like that word, resilient, was just a pretty way of saying, "You take what we give you." I stopped bringing dishes, stopped trying to fill the space, stopped trying to earn the seat that was never really offered, and slowly, I started disappearing. Not because I wanted to, but because it was easier than being reminded I didn't belong. The final moment didn't scream. It whispered, a soft, cutting comment that made me put down my fork and never pick it back up. It was her birthday. "A dinner for just family," she said with a sharp smile. I had picked out a gift, wrapped it gently, even wore the earrings she once complimented, thinking maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But when I stepped into the restaurant, she looked at me like I was an interruption, not a guest, not a daughter-in-law, just an inconvenience. She leaned close and said, "There aren't enough seats. Maybe next time. Call ahead." Like I was a reservation, not a person, I looked at my husband. He looked away, and something inside me quietly cracked. I smiled, softly, set the gift on the hostess stand, and walked out without saying another word. I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't cause a scene. I just let the silence say everything they refused to hear. That night, I sat in my car for a long time, keys in hand, heart in my throat, and I realised I had been fighting for a seat at a table that was never built for me. So I stopped knocking, and I started building, not out of revenge, but out of remembering what I deserved before I forgot. I didn't storm out and build an empire the next day. I just woke up earlier, slept less, spoke to myself more kindly. I went back to the little idea I'd tucked away in a dusty folder, an old dream of a cafe. Quiet, cosy, books on the walls and soft music from the corner, a place where people felt like they belonged. Because I knew what it felt like not to, I started small, selling scones out of my apartment kitchen, delivering them in paper bags with handwritten notes. Some days I made just enough for rent and coffee. Other days I didn't even break even. But every order felt like a vote of confidence in the woman I was becoming. No applause, no shortcuts, just grit, and mornings that smelled like cinnamon and courage. I didn't post about it, didn't tell his family, didn't even mention it to him at first. It was mine, my space, my seat. For once in my life, I wasn't trying to be included. I was trying to build something worth being part of. And then one morning, everything changed. Not because the world noticed me, but because one person did. It started with a post, just one customer, a quiet girl with round glasses and a lavender latte habit, snapped a photo and called it the softest corner in town. She tagged the cafe, and by noon, I had a line. People came for the cinnamon buns, but they stayed for the light, for the way the place made them feel, unrushed, unjudged. Someone said it felt like being welcomed home by someone who actually missed you. The local paper called, then a podcast. Then someone offered to invest. I wasn't ready, but I said yes anyway, because sometimes the door doesn't open again. The first time I saw the cafe name on a canvas tote bag downtown, I froze. Not because of pride, but because I remembered the woman who once sat in her car outside a birthday dinner with a wrapped gift no one wanted, and now here she was, stamped on fabric, carried by strangers, held with care. He heard about it through a friend, texted, "Did you really start a bakery, or is that just Instagram being Instagram?" I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because that chapter didn't need footnotes. The cafe grew, not overnight, but slowly, kindly, like healing, like learning to take up space without apology. And one day, a regular walked in and called me boss, just like that, and I realised. They saw me the way I had always hoped to see myself. I stopped needing introductions, stopped shrinking my name so others could swallow it easier. People walked in and said, "Hi, boss," like it wasn't a surprise, like I'd always been her. And maybe I had. But now, she was louder, straight, more still. I remember one morning, the cafe was full, sunlight spilling across the floor, kids giggling over cocoa, an old man scribbling poetry on a napkin, and I looked around and didn't feel like a visitor in my own life anymore. A little girl walked up to the counter, dragging a stuffed bear and holding a dollar bill like it was gold. She pointed at a cookie and said, "My mum says you built this." I smiled. Not because it was true, but because it felt like finally someone saw me as the one who could. I didn't wear power suits, didn't have a corner office, but I had keys to a place I opened, and people who waited for the warmth I baked into every corner. One day, My name was painted on the front glass. Not big, not flashy, but enough. Enough to remind me I was never too much, never too emotional, never too soft. I was never resilient the way she meant it. I was strong the way I meant it. And just when I stopped needing them, when I stopped measuring my worth by someone else's chair, an invitation arrived to a dinner, a celebration, and a name on the envelope that made me pause. The envelope was ivory, heavy, embossed in gold with curls that tried too hard. It smelled like her perfume, powdery, floral, the kind that lingered long after she left a room. I turned it over 3 times before opening it. Inside, "You are cordially invited," in script too fancy to feel sincere. It was a dinner, anniversary, some milestone for the family business, a photo op, no doubt, a room full of people who still use the word legacy, like it was love. At the bottom, her name, mother-in-law, signed in ink as if that ever made it real. I hadn't heard from her in 2 years. Not a message, not a knock, not even a whisper when the cafe opened 2 blocks from her favourite brunch spot. And now, this. Not a question, not an apology, just an assumption that I would come and sit and smile like the past hadn't happened in full colour. I set the invitation down, tried to laugh, but it caught in my chest like a thorn, because I knew what this was. Not a welcome, not a peace offering, a performance, one where I was expected to play the silent extra in someone else's redemption arc, and for a moment I wanted to burn the invitation. But instead, I just stood there, holding it, wondering, what would happen if I went? Not for her, but for me. I stared at the invitation for a long time, long enough for the coffee to go cold, long enough to wonder if I was still that girl who needed to be chosen by people who never saw her. I picked up the phone, almost called him, almost texted, "Did your mother send this, or did you just forget to warn me?" But I didn't, because I wasn't calling to be dismissed in a new, more polite way. Instead, I called my mum. She answered on the 3rd ring, breathless, as if love still rushed to the surface just to hear my name. She didn't say much, just let me talk. Let me list all the reasons not to go, and all the ones I didn't want to admit out loud, like how part of me still hoped they'd look at me and say, "We were wrong." But my mum, she didn't coddle me, she just said, "Baby, you don't need to walk into fire to prove you're flame-proof." And yet, I didn't throw the invitation away, didn't rip it, didn't burn it. I just left it on the counter, right next to a cinnamon bun, cooling for a customer who hadn't shown up yet. The next morning, I packed a bag, didn't tell anyone, didn't post a thing, just locked the cafe, slid the key into my back pocket and whispered to the mirror, "You're not going to beg. You're going to observe." Because sometimes you return to a place not for closure, but to remind yourself that you've already outgrown it. I walked in without waiting to be announced. No grand entrance, no slow-motion gasps, just heels clicking on marble and the scent of money trying to cover up coldness. The room was glossy, too polished, everyone dressed like they were selling perfection they couldn't afford. And there she was, my mother-in-law, in burgundy silk, waving at people she used to whisper about. She saw me. Of course she did. Her smile twitched, eyes scanned for someone to fix this. But I didn't give her the chance. I just walked past, calm, sure, like I belonged there because I did. A server walked up, young, nervous. "Excuse me, Ma'am, are you here with the Hendersons?" I tilted my head, smiled politely. "No," I said, "I'm here for myself." I kept walking until I found an empty table near the window, not hidden, not central, just mine. And as I sat down, I caught a flash of surprise from a familiar face. It was Ryan. My sister-in-law's boyfriend. He blinked, then smiled. Not awkward, not smug. Just that kind of knowing look people give you when they've heard a story. But now, they're finally meeting the version you never told. He walked over, hands in pockets, calm as the sea before a shift, and with a quiet nod, he said, "Hi, boss." That's when every fork paused mid-air, every head turned, and the air shifted. Not because I spoke, but because someone else finally did. She approached like a politician, smile stretched tight, voice dipped in sugar with a blade underneath. "Well, look who finally showed up." She said it like a joke, but no one laughed, not even herself. I looked up from my glass, didn't rise, didn't fold my napkin, just held her gaze like it was a mirror I was done apologizing to. "Didn't expect me?" I asked. She blinked once, twice, that pause where the real face flickers through. "We didn't know if you got the invitation," she said. Her hand touched the back of the empty chair next to mine, not quite sitting, not quite leaving. "You know how things get lost sometimes." I smiled, small, controlled. "No," I said, "I don't lose things." I let it hang. Watched her fingers curl just slightly. A twitch. But in that room, it was an earthquake. People were pretending not to listen. But even the waiters slowed their steps. Then she said it. The line rehearsed a dozen times in her head. "Well, let's not make this awkward. It's a family night." That's when Ryan stepped forward, set down his drink, cleared his throat. And with the ease of someone who's already made up his mind, he said, "Funny. I didn't know we were inviting outsiders to family dinners." The room held its breath. Even the jazz band missed a note. She turned to him. "Excuse me?" But he didn't blink. He continued, "She's the only one in this room who actually built something." My mother-in-law's voice dropped. "This isn't the place." I stood up. Now, no shaking hands, no cracking voice, just a woman done playing quiet. "You're right," I said. "This isn't the place." And with that, I turned, left her standing there with every eye on her and none of them blinking. Behind me, the room tried to return to normal. But once the silence cracks, you can't unhear the truth echoing through it. I didn't leave, not yet. Letting her stew was almost ceremonial. I walked back to my table and sat down like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just cracked the ceiling with 5 syllables. The server came over, visibly sweating. Would you like something to drink?" I smiled. "Whatever the house recommends for women who aren't supposed to be here." He didn't know what to do, just nodded and fled. Ryan, still standing nearby, shook his head slightly and grinned. "You've always been like this." I raised an eyebrow. I used to be quiet. People tried to carry on. Forks clinked against plates. Glasses lifted with too much force. Fake laughter filled the corners like perfume trying to cover rot. At the far end of the table, my sister-in-law whispered something. Too fast, too pointed. Her boyfriend didn't move. He was watching me. A toast was made. Something about legacy, family, tradition. I raised my glass, clinked it gently against Ryan's. "Cheers to rewriting all of that." The piano started again. Soft jazz, like nothing had happened. But the room knew. It always does. And when dessert came, a tiramisu, heavy on cocoa dust, I dipped my spoon in slowly and whispered, "Sweet, just like her lies." I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I'd made my point without raising my voice. But then she stood up and said something she never should have. She stood, glass still in hand, smile still on. But her voice, that cut sharper than any shattered plate. "I guess some people just can't take a hint," she said, loud enough for everyone. not looking at me, but not looking away either. A few people gasped, someone dropped a spoon, but I didn't move, didn't flinch. She continued, as if every word was dipped in vintage spite. You know, no matter how much money you make, it doesn't buy you class. Ryan's chair scraped back. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" But I stayed seated, because the best thunder waits for silence. I stood. Not fast, not slow, just final. Walked toward her, each step like punctuation, and when I stopped beside her, I didn't yell, didn't cry. I smiled. Then I leaned in, just close enough for her to hear, but loud enough for the room to listen. And yet, here I am, sitting at your table, on your night, in your dress code, being called boss by your future son-in-law. She froze, literally froze. A tremble behind the eyes, the kind only people with secrets recognize. And then I dropped it, the final match. Funny thing about class. It shows up more in Who's Afraid of It. I stepped back, picked up my bag, turned to Ryan. You coming? He didn't hesitate. And as we walked out, the only sound louder than my heels was the silence behind us. Tight, humiliated, and earned. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not because I escaped, but because this time, I didn't leave quietly. The door closed behind me with a softness that felt like revenge. No slamming, no spectacle, just peace. Ryan followed, didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. Some silences say everything. The night air hit my skin like a baptism. Cool, unapologetic, real. We walked toward the car slowly. Not because we were tired, but because I wasn't rushing anymore. I've never seen her like that, Ryan finally said. I smiled. She's never seen me like this either. He laughed, a low sound that felt like an old friend. She'll never forget that line. I shrugged. She won't be the first. A breeze picked up, carried away the perfume of fake smiles and clinking forks. I stopped at the sidewalk, looked back once, just once. The restaurant still glowed, but it didn't pull me. It had nothing left I needed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't on the outside. I was just out and free. In the quiet that followed, a memory returned, uninvited but welcome. As we drove away, the city lights blurred past the window like old thoughts I'd stopped chasing. Ryan turned the music low, let the silence speak for a while, and in that silence, she returned. Not my mother-in-law, not Emily, but my mother. A soft image pressed against memory's glass. She was in the kitchen, hair pinned up, wearing that faded blue sweater she never threw out. I was maybe 8, sitting on the floor, crayons scattered around me. I had drawn a table, a really big one, too big for the paper. And I remember telling her, everyone gets a seat, no one gets kicked out. She looked at it, smiled, and said, then one day, make your own table, sweetheart. And choose your people with kindness, not permission. I hadn't thought of that moment in years, but it found me when I needed it most. I closed my eyes in the passenger seat, let the memory sit with me like an old song that still knows all the words. Hey, Ryan said softly. You okay? I nodded, just once. Not because everything was fine, but because I finally understood. I hadn't just left her table tonight. I had returned to my own. And when we got home, there it was, quiet, waiting, and more powerful than any toast or speech. The apartment was dark, except for the hallway light that we always forgot to switch off. Ryan opened the door for me, but didn't follow. He stayed outside, like he knew this last step needed to be mine. I walked in slowly, kicked off my shoes, let the silence wrap around me like a blanket I hadn't felt in years. And then I saw it. On the table, a small wooden frame, one I hadn't noticed in a while. Inside it, a crayon drawing, old, faded at the edges, a big table, drawn by a child's hand, uneven chairs, colourful people, a smiley face, sun in the corner, and in big, crooked letters, "Everyone gets a seat." I stood still, not crying, not smiling, just breathing. That drawing had moved with me through dorm rooms, shared apartments, corporate relocations, sometimes shoved in boxes, sometimes placed on mantles, but never thrown away. And tonight, it felt like it had been waiting, like it knew this was the moment it was meant for. I picked it up, ran my fingers gently along the wood, then set it back down, but this time in the centre of the table, where it could be seen, because I no longer needed permission to belong. I was done shrinking, and I had no plans to ever make myself small again. Somewhere deep inside, I could feel that little girl, the one with the crayons, finally standing. I sat on the couch, the framed drawing still within reach, fingers curled into the fabric beside me, not clenched, not afraid, just remembering. It wasn't a big moment, not a birthday, not a goodbye, just a Wednesday. I had come home from school crying again. A classmate had told me my lunch looked poor, and when I told Mum, expecting her to fix it, she didn't. She just knelt down, took my hand, and said, "If they don't invite you, honey, make your own table." That was the first time I'd ever heard the phrase, didn't understand it fully then, but something about the way she said it, quiet, without anger, etched it into me. For years I thought she was teaching me to be tough, to be independent, to survive. But tonight, I finally heard it right. She wasn't teaching me how to fight. She was teaching me how to stop asking. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes, and saw that old kitchen, sunlight through the window, the smell of warm rice and jasmine soap, my mum's soft hands braiding my hair, her voice, barely above a whisper, "You don't need their seat, baby. Yours will always be here." I didn't cry. I just let her be with me a little longer. And when I opened my eyes, something inside me had loosened, not toward them, but toward me. The next morning, I woke up early, not because of an alarm, but because my body had finally slept. Not in fear, not in defense, just rest. I made coffee, 2 mugs, one for me, one out of habit. And then I sat by the window. The table still held the drawing, still brave, still bold. But I didn't look at it. I looked outside, at the light hitting the sidewalk, at a couple laughing across the street, at a dog pulling its owner in every direction except forward. And I thought of her, my mother-in-law, all the sharp looks, the cold invites, the way she made welcome sound like a threat. And for the first time, I didn't feel anything sharp in return, just space. That's how forgiveness really feels. Not warm, not pretty, just an opening, like a window cracked in a stale room. I didn't send her a message, didn't write a letter, didn't perform some noble act. I just let the weight go. Not for her, for me, because every minute I spent replaying her voice in my head was a minute I gave her the power to rewrite mine, and I was done letting people edit my story. So I stood up, took the second mug, poured it out gently, like a goodbye without bitterness, and whispered to no one, "You don't get to stay here anymore." The table felt lighter, the apartment quieter, and in that stillness, something shifted. That afternoon, I printed the photo, not of the dinner, not of the confrontation, but of the restaurant door, wide open, light spilling in like it had been waiting for someone to finally walk through. I framed it, simple wood, no caption, and I hung it in the hallway. Right beside the mirror I used to check before dinner parties. It wasn't for guests, it wasn't to make a point. It was for me, to remind myself that next time I don't wait for permission. The doorbell rang that evening. I didn't expect anyone, didn't want anyone, but I answered it anyway. No one was there. Just a small envelope on the floor. My name, nothing else. Inside, a note, 5 words, familiar handwriting, software measured. You looked like her tonight. No signature. I didn't need one. I knew it was her. And maybe that was her version of sorry. I didn't cry, didn't clutch the note, just walked it quietly to the dining table, slid it under the crayon drawing, folded side down, hidden, but not erased. Then I turned off the light and walked into the quiet without looking back. Some stories end with fire. Mine ended with an open seat, and no need to fill it. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with a door gently closing behind you, and the soft sound of your own footsteps walking away without flinching. I didn't get the apology, didn't find reconciliation wrapped in hugs or sudden revelations, but I found something else, something smaller, quieter, mine. I found that sometimes you don't go back to be welcomed. You go back to prove to yourself that you no longer need the welcome. You go back to stand tall in the space that once tried to fold you. And when you leave, you don't slam the door. You don't make a speech. You just walk. And you don't whisper a goodbye. Because the real goodbye was the version of you they can no longer recognize. So let me ask you this. Have you ever forgiven someone who never even knew they hurt you? Not for them, but for you, because sometimes freedom doesn't come with a key. It comes when you stop knocking.